Now, an hour to give. From philanthropists to foundations, nonprofits to volunteers, each working hard every day to make our city a better place. Join us as we celebrate the art of giving in Ottawa. Here's your host, Sam Laprade.
Think about today's youth and think about all the opportunities that they need to be able to get ahead. And that's one of the reasons we brought Ian Bingeman and Youth Ottawa into the studio today. Hello.
Hello.
I love the work you're doing, and you're doing so much with youth. Give us a little bit of a taste of some of the programs that you offer.
Sure, yeah. At its heart, the things that we do are all about how do we create a sense of agency and ownership in youth in their environments? How do we create citizens? How do we give them opportunities to take their brilliant ideas, their passion for the community challenges they see at their feet, and apply them? So this works at two levels. At the first level, we invest in young people who've already started their own social innovation projects in response to lived experience. So it could be, for example, an Ibrahim Musa, who started the Cuts for Kids Foundation because growing up in community housing, he realized the fundamental dignity of a really cool haircut.
Right.
So now you can provide free haircuts to kids in community housing.
Love that.
How do we help him to scale his impact, to find a way to support himself as he helps other youth? And what we're able to do is create a nice virtuous circle where we can further employ him to go and run programs in high schools, where he now works with youth in a high school civics classes, saying, what grinds your gears? What are those issues you see in the community that you like to change? Well, now let's do something about it. And so that's how we operate. We're in the sector of youth services, but there's a slight twist. A lot of really important organizations do a lot of really important work providing services for youth. I think, and Youth Ottawa believes, we have to have an opportunity to have a flip side to that coin. We have to start youth early, providing service back to the community. And that's what we're all about.
As the executive director, what is your dream for this organization?
My dream for the organization is when we are in the background, when I see a young woman like Nyala, who is a former neighbor of yours and spoke with you earlier this year, is able to get a Pathy Fellowship for $40,000, plus another few grants where she can now sit back and scale her impact, where she's leading change for young women of color by young women of color. And we're just there in a mentorship role.
It's almost like you're the wallpaper, right?
Yes.
Like, you know, it's almost like, you know, you're there, you're in the room, you're there to provide that support. But what's happening at that main table, if you will, in the middle of the room is all these youth coming together and their voice is being heard. It's not I know you well enough to know you don't want your voice to be heard necessarily. You're wanting the voice of youth to be heard, and you just happen to be, that thing that kind of gets them out there.
Absolutely. How do we create opportunities for people? And my personal approach to this is, how do we realize full human potential? That's how do we unlock that? And so we look at doing things really efficiently. A lot of the work we do is through schools because that's where most youth are at. And we're able to reach large numbers of them with these opportunities far more effectively than if we ran something on our own out in the community. And that's not just because the youth are there, but also because we get to work with wonderful partners, and particularly OCDSP and their experiential learning department are doing some amazing work around getting youth out there and really making learning about learning by osmosis. What you see in the community gets taken into consideration in the classroom. What you do in the classroom impacts the community. I see the sky as the limit for the kind of work that we can do with youth when we start to, like you say, maybe be that wallpaper and take a step back and allow other voices to come to the fore and also be work in partnership with us. We'll talk with Glenn Sheen shortly about our partnership with RBC. And we'll hear from another young man who is a Spirit of the Capital winner and also a member of our Amplify Fellowship from this last year, Abdul, who will come in and speak as well. And so I think that's a good way of saying, we want to step back and allow others to speak.
Now, tell me about your biggest barrier, because I know you've got big dreams for this organization, as we've talked about, but what are the barriers to providing this on an ongoing basis for youth?
Yeah, I think the largest barrier is the same barrier that every single nonprofit struggles with, and that's that ongoing funding piece. It's how do we keep the lights on? How do we effectively do our accounting? All that really boring stuff. My predecessor and my mentor, Jason Collard, he used to have a joke where people would say, "Oh, you're the executive director of Youth Ottawa. That must be amazing." They have these, visions of like him at these events and like, almost like a shaman-like figure. And he says he'd always be like, basically the reality is I spent all my time hunched over a keyboard staring at a spreadsheet.
Right.
And yes, that is the nature of our life these days. So it's not an insurmountable barrier, but I think it's a significant one. I will say that a big tip of the cap to the Ottawa Community Foundation and Marco Pagani in the direction they've been leading in terms of getting organization like ours to adopt a social enterprise mindset. And that alone has been hugely beneficial to our organization. We're only just now starting to see the benefits of it.
It is really a model that fundraising and nonprofits really have to take a listen to that, because I think it's something that not only Youth Ottawa is engaging in, but I think we're going to see it globally make a big change.
I think so, and I think it's that there's a feast famine of donation drives, there's a feast famine of grant cycles, and when you have an ability to understand the value they're creating, not just for your participants, but also for those who are looking to have that created, and you can go to them on that kind of business transactional approach, where your charitable objectives are still being met, not only do you have better sustainability, but you're actually, the impact on your mission is incredibly higher, and that's what we're starting to see from our program evaluation. There's still a role, for example, for all the other elements that go into a charity, right, for support, whether it's donations or grants. But I think to the degree to which you can base your activities on an earned revenue model, you're going to be strong going forward.
What's the story that when you put your head on your pillow at night, you think, this is why I'm doing this?
I think it's what happened when we have an opportunity to run a social enterprise pilot for the school board, for the OCDSP. And in the back of my head, I kind of know what this is going to look like. But I see these young people from our Amplify Fellowship sitting down and themselves coming up with a program which is better than what I could have devised. I see them going in the schools, and I see them taking the program materials that we provided, and I see them adapting, improvising, and overcoming on the ground and having even better results. Mm-hmm. That's really how are we creating organic kind of capacity within youth to give back to the community. It's not going to happen when I have to direct every single project myself.
Right.
But this idea where we try and invest in these young people like the Ibrahims, the Nailas, and Abdul, who we'll hear from later, we're able to empower them to empower further youth. And that's how we achieve scale.
Do you think youth and youth relations has changed since we were young? Do you think the opportunities that youth have today are less than maybe when you and I were going through this?
I don't know how much time we have to answer that question. Here's what I'll say. I'll say that I know from neuroscience, can't argue neuroscience, right? We know that the most innovative time of a person's life is between the ages of 15 and 25. Mm-hmm. This is when their gray matter is literally able to think around corners. We know we have some really complex problems that we're facing in the world today. Mm-hmm. We are not going to solve them unless we have an effective application of that innovation. So our model is really, how do we take youth at the lower end of that scale, at the 15 years old, in high schools, give them an opportunity not just to innovate on an idea or a challenge they see in the community, but to learn the tools that they can use to do that. And most importantly, to develop the identity as a civic actor of someone who gives back, and the sense of self-efficacy that if I stand up and try and make a difference, I will succeed. So by the time they get to be 25 and they're like the folks in our Amplified Fellowship, they're now fully actualized. They're fully able to be agents in their own right and make that change. So I don't know if that's fundamentally changed. I don't know if neuroscience is changing much because that's not my specialty. But I do know that if we are going to solve these very real and pressing problems, talking about investing in youth is not about the future. It's about right now.
Mm-hmm. Really important point. And I think social media has certainly changed our world, right? Youth have access to more than they ever have in terms of information, and giving them a voice that they can be part of the conversation is key.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the last part I'll add to that is there's a danger as well, because too much information decoupled from an ability to do something about it is an incredibly difficult thing to take. And we really need to be conscious as a collective of how we are handling this abundance of information. What avenues are we allowing youth to give back and to feel like they're becoming part of solutions? Because if we're not doing that, then we're actually doing some harm.
Absolutely. When you think about the amount of youth today that require sort of that hand up, if you will, how do you think you're sort of hitting those targets in Ottawa?
Yeah, I think so. One of the first things we can do is in working in partnership with, in particular, the OCDSP, we can be directed to the schools where they're struggling the most. And the areas, for example, the grade 10 civics and careers curriculum is one of the most failed classes in Ontario. And when you go to the schools where they're struggling the most with it, where they have the most kind of societal barriers to youth succeeding. So we're able to go right in there. And the other part that we do is we are able to have a for youth by youth model. I think that's critically important. Sometimes, like when we have a model of like a We Day, and you put these really amazing people up on the stage, for the folks sitting back in the audience, it could seem like too far of a distance to breach. But if you can take some of these remarkable young people who are making changes in their local communities, and you get them to go and work with youth in high schools who might not yet be engaged, might not even see themselves as potentially having something to offer their communities. And when those remarkable young people who are facilitating the programs can go to the youth in the seats who have never given something back before and say, I'm interested in what you have to do, I think that's where we provide the opportunity. And we're meeting a really an otherwise unmet need.
If someone's listening right now and they wanted to invest in Youth Ottawa, how would they do that?
So through our Amplified Fellowship. Yeah, just this is where we take youth in the summer. We give them access to, they've already had their own social innovation projects. We give them access to an entrepreneur in residence, put them through leadership training, deliberate networking, and allow them to work on their own initiatives, but also train them in our programs. Because then we can hire them from our partnership with the school boards to go and run programs in the schools. So it's really comes down to two levels of operation. The Amplified Fellowship is all about investing in already remarkable youth so they can scale their impact further. And then we create this really cool virtuous circle where we can hire them through work we do for the school boards to reach other youth in the schools.
Amazing. Ian Bingeman, one of my favorite people. Stick with me, okay? You're going to hang out because we're going to bring Glenn Sheen into the studio. Glenn Sheen from RBC, and he's going to share all of the innovative ways that RBC has gotten involved with Youth Ottawa.
An hour